The California sun was setting as Keanu Reeves pulled up to the back entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel. He let out a tired sigh, rubbing his eyes after 14 straight hours on set. The new action movie was pushing everyone to their limits, but Keanu, being Keanu, never complained once. "Thanks for the ride, Tom," he said to his driver, a man who'd been with him for nearly a decade. "I think I'll sneak in the back today." Tom nodded knowingly. The front's crawling with paparazzi. Someone must have tipped them off. Keanu grabbed his worn leather backpack and slipped out of the car. He just wanted a hot shower and some peace and quiet. The thought of pushing through a crowd of flashing cameras made his shoulders tense up. "See you tomorrow, bright and early," he called as Tom drove away. Standing alone at the service entrance, Keanu spotted a maintenance cart parked against the wall. Next to it hung a gray janitor's uniform on a hook, probably left there while someone was on break. An idea sparked in his tired mind. Keanu wasn't like other Hollywood stars. He rode the subway, sat and chatted with homeless people, and gave away millions without wanting credit. Fame had never changed his heart. If anything, it made him crave normal moments even more. Without giving it much thought, he slipped the uniform jacket over his black t-shirt. It smelled faintly of cleaning products but fit well enough. He grabbed a baseball cap hanging on the same hook and pulled it low over his eyes. Looking down at his faded jeans and worn boots, he decided he could pass for hotel maintenance easily enough. "Sorry about this," he whispered to no one in particular, feeling a bit guilty about borrowing the uniform. "I'll make it up to whoever owns this." He grabbed the handle of the cleaning cart and pushed it toward the service elevator. This wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. On movie sets, he often spent time with the crew rather than hiding away in his trailer. Just last month, he had helped the catering team serve lunch when one of their workers called in sick. No one treated him differently, and that's exactly how he liked it. The service elevator dinged, and Keanu pushed the cart inside, pressing the button for his floor. As the doors began to close, a hand shot between them. "Hold it, please," called out a voice. The doors reopened to reveal a young woman in a hotel housekeeping uniform, looking rushed and carrying an armful of fresh towels. "Thanks," she said, stepping in without looking up. Then she froze, staring at Keanu's face. Her eyes widened slightly. Keanu gave a small smile and put a finger to his lips. The woman nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "Your secret's safe with me," she whispered. "Rough day with the cameras outside?" "Something like that," Keanu replied softly. "Just looking for a quiet night." "Well, the uniform's a nice touch, but you might want to actually use the cart," she said with a gentle laugh. "Pushing around an empty cleaning cart looks more suspicious than just walking to your room." Keanu looked down at the cart and chuckled. "Good point. Any suggestions?" The housekeeper quickly arranged some clean towels and toiletries on his cart. "There you go. Now you look official." The elevator stopped at the 4th floor and she stepped out. "Good luck, Mr. Reeves," she whispered. "And thanks for being so normal." As the doors closed, Keanu felt a warmth in his chest. These little human connections meant everything to him. In a world where people treated him like something more than human, these moments reminded him of who he really was. The plan was simple. Get to the 5th floor, ditch the cart somewhere discreet, and walk to his room. But when the elevator opened, on the lobby level instead of continuing up, Keanu realized he'd hit the wrong button. The grand lobby of the hotel stretched before him, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It was busy with guests checking in and out, business people having drinks and tourists taking photos of the famous interior. Keanu pulled his cap lower and began pushing his cart across the vast space, keeping his head down. "Just act natural," he told himself. Nobody expects to see Keanu Reeves pushing a cleaning cart. He was halfway across the lobby when the wheel of the cart caught on the plush carpet. The sudden jolt sent a stack of towels tumbling to the floor. Keanu quickly knelt to pick them up, hoping not to draw attention. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice from behind. "What do you think you're doing?" Keanu turned to see a man in an expensive suit, a gold name tag identifying him as Gregory Palmer, hotel manager. The man's face was set in a look of annoyed authority. "Just heading up to restock," Keanu replied, keeping his voice low and his face partially hidden by the cap. "I don't recognize you," the manager said, eyes narrowing. "All maintenance staff are required to check in at the service desk. Where's your ID badge?" Keanu realized he'd made a mistake. The uniform jacket he'd borrowed didn't have an ID badge like the housekeeper in the elevator had worn. "I must have left it in my locker," he said, straightening up with the fallen towels. "I can go get it if you need." The manager's face hardened. "This is completely unacceptable. We have protocols for a reason." His voice was rising now, drawing the attention of nearby guests. A small crowd began to gather, sensing the drama of someone getting in trouble. "The last thing we need is unauthorized personnel wandering around our five-star establishment," continued the manager, his voice echoing across the marble floor. "Do you know how many celebrities and dignitaries stay with us? Security is our top priority." The irony wasn't lost on Keanu, but he kept quiet, still hoping to resolve this without revealing his identity. The last thing he wanted was to cause a scene. "I apologize," Keanu said softly. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Your job?" The manager laughed coldly. "I'm not even sure you work here. For all I know, you could be trying to access guest rooms for theft." People were openly staring now. Some had their phones out, probably recording what they thought was a worker getting rightfully scolded. Keanu felt his cheeks burning, not for himself, but for the actual maintenance workers who might have to deal with this kind of treatment regularly. "Sir, I'm not," Keanu began, but the manager cut him off with a raised hand. "I want to see some identification right now or I'm calling security," he demanded, pulling out a walkie-talkie for emphasis. A woman in an elegant dress whispered loudly to her companion, "Can you believe they let people like that work here? He probably snuck in off the street." Another guest added, "They should check his pockets before they let him go." The comments stung Keanu more than the manager's scolding. The judgment in their voices, the quick assumption that someone in a janitor's uniform must be up to no good. It revealed an ugliness he'd seen too often in high-end places. Keanu took a deep breath. He hadn't wanted this attention, but now it seemed unavoidable. Just as he was about to remove his cap and end the charade, a voice called out from the crowd, "Wait a minute." A young bellhop pushed through the onlookers, his eyes wide with recognition. He moved closer to Keanu, peering under the brim of the cap. The bellhop's mouth fell open slightly, and Keanu gave him a small, resigned smile. The moment of truth had arrived. Little did anyone in that lobby know, the next few minutes would completely change how they viewed the man in the janitor's uniform, and perhaps make them question how they treated people they deemed beneath them in the future. The young bellhop stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at Keanu's face. For a moment, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. That's Keanu Reeves," the bellhop finally stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The hotel manager's face twisted in confusion. "What nonsense are you talking about, Alex? Get back to your post." But Alex the bellhop didn't move. Instead, he broke into a smile that lit up his entire face. "Sir, I've seen all your movies. The Matrix changed my life." A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Phones were raised, higher, and people began to inch closer. Keanu sighed and slowly removed his cap, running a hand through his slightly messy dark hair. The manager's mouth fell open. His face, which had been flushed with authority just moments ago, now drained of all color. Mr. Reeves?" he croaked. "Hello," Keanu said with a small, awkward wave. The lobby erupted in a mix of gasps, excited whispers, and the unmistakable sound of camera shutters clicking rapidly. The same guests who had been looking down their noses at the supposed maintenance worker were now elbowing each other to get a better view. "I don't understand," the manager spluttered, his hands nervously smoothing his already perfect tie. "Why, are you dressed like someone who cleans your hotel?" Keanu finished for him, his voice gentle but firm. There was no anger in his tone, just a quiet dignity that somehow made the manager's face flush even deeper. The woman in the elegant dress who had made the rude comment earlier was now frantically fixing her hair, trying to position herself for a photo. Her companion looked like he wanted to sink into the marble floor. "I just wanted to get to my room without a fuss," Keanu explained, addressing not just the manager but everyone listening. "The uniform was probably not my best idea, but sometimes it's nice to just be invisible." His words hung in the air, carrying a weight that made several people look down in shame. The bellhop, Alex, stepped forward with a look of understanding. "The paparazzi have been camped outside all day, sir," he said. "Word got out that you were staying here." Keanu nodded. "That explains it. Look, I'm sorry for the confusion," he said to the manager. "I should have just called ahead for help with a private entrance." The manager was now practically tripping over himself to apologize. "Mr. Reeves, please forgive my terrible behavior. I had no idea. I would never have spoken to you that way if I'd known who you were. We're honored to have you staying with us." Something shifted in Keanu's expression then, a subtle change that only those paying close attention would notice. His eyes, warm and kind just seconds before, took on a hint of sadness. "That's the thing though, isn't it?" he said quietly. "Nobody should be spoken to that way regardless of who they are." The manager blinked rapidly, caught off guard by the gentle rebuke. "Our maintenance staff work incredibly hard," Keanu continued. "They deserve respect too." An uncomfortable silence fell over the lobby. Even the clicking of cameras slowed as his words sank in. Several guests exchanged guilty glances, perhaps recalling their own interactions with hotel staff they had barely acknowledged. From the back of the crowd, a man in a gray uniform similar to the one Keanu was wearing pushed forward. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with weathered hands and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "That's my jacket you're wearing," he said. But there was no accusation in his voice, only amusement. Keanu immediately began to take it off. "I'm so sorry. I found it by the service entrance and borrowed it. I'll pay for any inconvenience." The older man waved him off with a laugh. "Keep it on until you get to your room, son. Seems like you need it more than I do right now." He extended his hand. "I'm Joe, head of maintenance." Keanu shook his hand firmly. "Nice to meet you, Joe. I promise I wasn't trying to make your job harder." "No harm done," Joe replied with a warm smile. "Though I gotta say, you might need some training. You're pushing that cart all wrong." This broke the tension, and laughter rippled through the lobby. Even Keanu chuckled. The hotel manager, desperate to recover from his embarrassing mistake, stepped forward again. "Mr. Reeves, please allow me to escort you personally to our presidential suite. We've upgraded you, of course at no additional charge." Keanu shook his head. "That's really not necessary. My original room is fine." "But we insist," the manager pressed, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "After this unfortunate incident—" "What incident?" Keanu interrupted gently. "I borrowed a uniform without asking. You were doing your job, protecting the hotel, let's just call it even." The manager looked like he might argue further, but something in Keanu's steady gaze made him nod reluctantly. By now, word had spread throughout the hotel. Staff members were appearing from every doorway, trying to catch a glimpse of the famous actor who had disguised himself as one of them. Guests who had been in their rooms were hurrying down, still in bathrobes and slippers. A small girl, no more than 7 years old, broke free from her father's grasp and ran up to Keanu. "Are you really the man from Bill and Ted?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Keanu knelt down to her level, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "I am, though that was a long time ago." "My daddy shows me your old movies," she said proudly. "He says you're the coolest actor ever because you're nice to everybody." "Your daddy sounds like a wise man," Keanu replied, gently fist-bumping the little girl who beamed with delight. As he straightened up, Keanu turned to Joe, the maintenance man. "Would you mind showing me the right way to push this cart? If I'm going to wear the uniform, I should at least look like I know what I'm doing." Joe laughed and positioned himself beside Keanu. "It's all in the wrists, see? And you gotta watch those wheels on the carpet." Together, they pushed the cart toward the elevator, with Joe giving a mock-serious lesson in the art of cart navigation. The crowd parted respectfully, many people now looking at both men with newfound appreciation. The hotel manager trailed behind them, still trying to make amends. "Mr. Reeves, perhaps you'd allow us to send up a complimentary bottle of our finest champagne, or a meal from our five-star restaurant." Keanu stopped and turned. His voice was kind but firm. "Thank you, but what I'd really like is some privacy for the rest of the evening." He paused, then added, "And maybe, if it's not too much trouble, could you make sure the maintenance staff gets a good meal tonight? On my tab." The manager nodded eagerly, grateful for the chance to redeem himself. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. Anything you wish." As the elevator doors opened, Joe gave Keanu a knowing look. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Keanu replied simply. Just before the doors closed, a woman's voice called out from the lobby, "We love you, Keanu." Several people joined in with similar sentiments, and Keanu raised a hand in acknowledgement, a slightly embarrassed smile on his face. Inside the elevator, it was just Keanu, Joe, and Alex the bellhop, who had somehow managed to squeeze in at the last moment, still looking starstruck. "So," Joe said casually as the elevator began to rise, "was it worth it? The disguise, I mean." Keanu laughed softly. "Not one of my better plans." "I don't know about that," Joe replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes people need to be reminded that we're all just people, worth treating right, famous or not." The elevator dinged as it reached Keanu's floor. As the doors opened, Alex the bellhop finally found his voice again. "Mr. Reeves," he said hesitantly, "would it be okay if I told people about this, not like to the press or anything, just my mom won't believe it?" Keanu smiled. "Sure, Alex. Tell your mom I said hello." As Keanu stepped out of the elevator with his borrowed cart, he turned back to Joe. "I'll return the uniform in the morning, properly cleaned." Joe waved him off. "Keep it. Might come in handy someday." The doors closed, leaving Keanu alone in the hallway. He pushed the cart toward his room, smiling to himself. It hadn't been the quiet, anonymous evening he'd planned, but somehow this felt better. Little did the hotel guests and staff know, the night's events were far from over. The story of Keanu Reeves, the humble Hollywood star who dressed as a janitor and stood up for the dignity of service workers, was about to spread far beyond the walls of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Keanu finally reached his room, sliding the keycard into the lock with a sigh of relief. The weight of so many eyes watching his every move had been heavier than any stunt harness he'd ever worn. As the door closed behind him, he leaned against it for a moment, enjoying the sudden quiet. He tossed the borrowed maintenance cap onto the bed and ran his hands through his hair. The room was nice, but not extravagant. He had specifically requested something normal, not the oversized suites they usually tried to give him. A simple king bed, a desk by the window, and a bathroom that didn't need its own zip code. Perfect. Keanu walked to the window and looked out at the city lights twinkling against the darkening sky. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his agent wondering why Dr. Keanu the janitor was suddenly trending online. News traveled fast in the age of social media. Sure enough, when he checked his phone, there were 12 missed calls and a flurry of text messages. One from his longtime friend. And stunt coordinator caught his eye. "Dude, you've gone viral again. Can't leave you alone for 5 minutes." Keanu smiled and tossed the phone onto the bed without responding. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with the outside world. Tonight, he just wanted a shower and some peace. As he was about to head to the bathroom, a gentle knock sounded at his door. For a brief moment, he considered pretending not to be there, but that wasn't his style. With a resigned smile, he opened the door. To his surprise, it wasn't the hotel manager or some eager fan who had somehow discovered his room number. It was Joe, the maintenance man whose uniform he'd borrowed, holding a tray with what looked like dinner. "Hope I'm not bothering you," Joe said, his weathered face breaking into a kind smile. "Thought you might be hungry after all that excitement downstairs." Keanu stepped back to let him in. "Not bothering at all. That's really thoughtful of you." Joe set the tray down on the desk. "Nothing fancy. Just some of the staff meal. Beef. Stew tonight. Best thing on the menu if you ask me. The fancy restaurant food looks pretty, but this'll fill you up." The simple bowl of stew, accompanied by fresh bread and butter, Looked better to Keanu than any five-star meal. Looks perfect. Would you like to join me? There's plenty here. Joe seemed surprised by the invitation but pulled up the desk chair while Keanu sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, they ate in comfortable silence. So, Joe finally said, breaking a piece of bread, bet this isn't the first time you've gone incognito. Keanu chuckled. No, but it might be the most memorable failure. You know, my daughter won't believe this, Joe said, shaking his head with a smile. She's been a fan of yours since Speed, has a poster of you and Sandra Bullock on her wall from when she was a teenager, never took it down even now that she's 30 with kids of her own. That's very flattering, Keanu said, genuinely touched. Speed was a special film to make. She always said you seemed like a regular guy, not caught up in all the Hollywood nonsense, Joe continued. Guess she was right. Keanu shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. I just try to remember what matters. Joe nodded thoughtfully. You know what you did downstairs? Standing up for the maintenance staff like that meant a lot. I didn't do anything special, Keanu replied. Maybe not to you, Joe said, his voice growing serious. But you'd be surprised how invisible we can feel sometimes. 32 years I've worked in hotels like this. Most guests look right through you when you're pushing a cart or fixing a leak. Keanu set his spoon down, giving Joe his full attention. There was something about the older man's quiet dignity that reminded him of his own grandfather. The manager, who yelled at you, Joe continued. He's actually not a bad guy most days. But in places like this, there's a pecking order, you know? Guests at the top, then management, then front desk folks, and way at the bottom, there's us. Maintenance, housekeeping, kitchen staff, the invisible people who make everything work. The most important people in the building, Keanu said. Joe smiled. Try telling that to the board of directors. A comfortable silence fell between them again as they finished their meal. Through the window, the last traces of sunset had faded to deep blue, and the city was fully awake with lights. I should let you get some rest, Joe said, standing and gathering the dishes back onto the tray. Big movie star like you probably has an early call time tomorrow. 6 a.m., Keanu confirmed with a grimace. But I'm glad you stopped by. As Joe reached the door, he paused. Just so you know, the lobby's gone absolutely nuts since you came. Up, hotel's trying to keep a lid on it, but about 50 reporters and photographers have shown up outside. Manager's having a fit. Keanu groaned. I'm sorry about that. The last thing I wanted was to cause problems. Are you kidding? Joe laughed. Most excitement this place has seen in years. The staff are loving it. Well, except for that woman in the fancy dress who made the nasty comment about you. Turns out she's some big-shot fashion designer. She's hiding in her room now, terrified someone got her on video being rude to Keanu Reeves. They both chuckled at the irony. Anyway, Joe continued, thought you should know that Alex, the bellhop, who recognized you, he's become the hotel hero. Everyone's buying him drinks at the staff bar for saving Keanu Reeves from being thrown out. Good for him, Keanu said with a genuine smile. He seemed like a nice kid. Joe nodded in agreement. Oh, and one more thing. The night manager asked, me to give you this? He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Keanu. Said it was important. After Joe left, Keanu opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Mr. Reeves, please accept my deepest apologies for the incident in the lobby. The hotel would like to offer you our sincere regrets and assure you of complete privacy for the remainder of your stay. We've arranged for security to keep press and fans at a distance and have prepared our private entrance for your use tomorrow morning. Your car will be waiting in the underground garage at whatever time you request. With deepest respect, Thomas Wilson, Night Manager. Underneath the note was a second piece of paper, a printout of a social media post that was apparently going viral. Someone had captured a photo of him kneeling down to speak with the little girl in the lobby. The caption read, Today I watched Keanu Reeves get yelled at for wearing a janitor's uniform at a fancy hotel. When they realized who he was, he could have been angry or entitled. Instead, he made sure the real maintenance staff got treated with respect. This is what a real role model looks like. Be excellent to each other. The post already had over 100,000 likes and shares. Keanu set the papers down and walked to the window again, looking out at the city. His reflection stared back at him, still wearing Joe's maintenance jacket. He hadn't planned on any of this happening when he borrowed that uniform. He just wanted to slip in unnoticed, to have a moment of normalcy in a life that often felt anything but normal. His phone buzzed again with more messages and notifications, but he ignored it. Instead, he picked up the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. "Hello, this is Keanu Reeves in room 512, he said when someone answered. "I'd like to arrange something for tomorrow morning, if possible." The next morning, Joe arrived for his shift at 5 a.m. as usual. As he entered through the staff entrance and headed to the maintenance room to get his cart, he noticed something unusual. All of his co-workers were gathered around the staff bulletin board, talking excitedly. "What's going on?" he asked, hanging up his jacket. The head of housekeeping turned to him with a broad smile. "You didn't hear? Check your locker, Joe." Confused, Joe walked to his locker and opened it. Inside, neatly folded, was his gray maintenance jacket, the one Keanu Reeves had borrowed. But that wasn't all. On top of the jacket was an envelope with his name on it. With everyone watching eagerly, Joe opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in a strong, clear handwriting. "Joe, thanks for the loan of the uniform, the dinner, and most of all, the conversation. People like you are the real stars. See you in the movies. Keanu." Paper-clipped to the note was something else. 2 tickets to the premiere of Keanu's new film, with a backstage pass. Joe looked up, momentarily speechless, as his co-workers erupted in cheers and questions. But before he could say anything, the maintenance room door opened again. The hotel manager stepped in, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the cleaning supplies and tool racks. "Good morning," he said, his voice unusually formal. "I have an announcement to make." The staff fell silent, exchanging curious glances. Whatever was coming next, they sensed it had something to do with the events of the previous evening, and with the Hollywood star who had briefly become one of them. The hotel manager shifted uncomfortably as all eyes in the maintenance room fixed on him. He cleared his throat twice before speaking, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "As you may know, we had a situation last night involving Mr. Keanu Reeves," he began, adjusting his perfectly straight tie. "The incident has gained significant attention online." The staff exchanged knowing looks. Most of them had already seen the videos and posts that had flooded social media overnight. "What you may not know," the manager continued, "is that Mr. Reeves had a special request this morning before he left." Joe clutched the premiere tickets in his hand, wondering what else Keanu could have done. The manager pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Mr. Reeves has asked that I read this to all of you." His exact words were, "Make sure everyone hears this, especially the maintenance and housekeeping staff." The room fell silent as the manager opened the envelope with careful fingers and began to read. "To the incredible team at Grand Plaza Hotel yesterday, I borrowed a maintenance uniform to avoid attention. Instead, I received an unexpected education. I've spent my career playing heroes on screen, but the real heroes are the ones who make places like this run smoothly day after day without recognition. I've asked the hotel management to use the money that would have been spent on upgrading me to the presidential suite to instead fund a staff appreciation week. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their job title. To the manager, thank you for protecting your hotel's security, even when you thought I was just someone who didn't belong. That's integrity." To Alex the bellhop, "Your kindness to a stranger in a janitor's uniform before you knew who I was speaks volumes about your character." And to Joe in maintenance, "Our conversation meant more to me than you know. The jacket fits perfectly, by the way. Be excellent to each other, Keanu Reeves." The manager folded the letter carefully and looked up at the stunned faces around him. For perhaps the first time in his career, he seemed at a loss for words. "So," he finally said, straightening his shoulders, "beginning next Monday, we will be implementing a staff appreciation week. Each department will receive additional break, time, catered meals, and a special bonus in your next paycheck." A cheer erupted from the staff with people hugging and high-fiving each other. The head of housekeeping, a woman who had worked at the hotel for 25 years, wiped tears from her eyes. The manager raised his hand for silence. There's more. Mr. Reeves has also requested that we review our staff recognition policies. Going forward, we will be implementing a new approach to how we treat all employees. He turned specifically to Joe. And as for you, Joe, Mr. Reeves mentioned you personally in our conversation this morning. He suggested that your experience and perspective would be valuable in helping us improve. I'd like you to join the management team for our policy review meetings. Joe's mouth fell open in surprise. For years, he had suggested improvements that would make life better for the maintenance staff, only to be politely ignored. Now, because of a chance encounter with a movie star, someone was finally listening. I'd be happy to help, Joe said, finding his voice. The manager nodded, looking both humbled and determined. Good. Now everyone back to work. We have a hotel to run. As he turned to leave, he paused and added something none of them had ever heard from him before. And thank you all for your hard work. After he left, the maintenance room exploded with excited chatter. Joe found himself surrounded by co-workers wanting to hear every detail of his conversation with Keanu. Was he really nice? Asked Luis from the night shift. Did he talk about his movies? Wondered Diane from housekeeping. Are those really premiere tickets? Questioned Bobby, pointing at the envelope in Joe's hand. Joe smiled, still processing everything that had happened. He was just a regular guy, he told them. The kind you'd want to have a beer with. We talked about work, family, normal stuff. As the excitement gradually settled and everyone returned to their duties, Joe prepared his cart for the day's work. The weight of the premiere tickets in his pocket felt surreal, a tangible reminder that the events of the previous night hadn't been a dream. His first call of the day was to fix a leaky shower in room 802. As he pushed his cart toward the elevator, he noticed something different. The guests in the lobby, business people checking out, tourists planning their day, were looking at him. Not through him, as they usually did, but at him. Some even nodded or smiled as he passed. Word had spread throughout the hotel. The maintenance staff, usually invisible except when needed for repairs, had become minor celebrities overnight. In the elevator, a well-dressed businessman stepped in and actually held the door for Joe's cart, something that had rarely happened before. Excuse me, the man said hesitantly. I hope this isn't inappropriate, but are you the maintenance worker from the Keanu Reeves story? The one whose uniform he borrowed? Joe nodded, a bit uncomfortable with the attention. The man broke into a smile. My daughter showed me the video this morning. Over 2 million views already. She said it was the most heartwarming thing she'd seen all year. Joe wasn't sure how to respond. Just doing my job, he said finally. That's exactly what makes it special, the businessman replied. My father was a janitor for 40 years. People treated him like he was invisible. What happened yesterday? Well, it meant something to a lot of us. The elevator dinged, arriving at the 8th floor. As Joe pushed his cart out, the businessman called after him, "Thank you for what you do." Those simple words, which Joe had rarely heard in his 32 years of service, left him momentarily speechless. Throughout the day, similar interactions happened. Guests stopping to chat, asking about Keanu, but also asking about Joe himself. How long he'd worked at the hotel, whether he enjoyed it, even seeking his recommendations for local restaurants. It was as if overnight, the invisible maintenance man had become someone worth noticing. During his lunch break, Joe sat in the staff cafeteria scrolling through his phone, still amazed by how far the story had spread. The hashtag, "Be excellent to each other," was trending nationwide, with people sharing stories about service workers who had made a difference in their lives. One post in particular caught his attention, a photo of a young woman hugging an older man in a janitor's uniform. The caption read, "Called my dad today to tell him I'm proud of the work he does. The Keanu janitor story reminded me that dignity isn't about what job you do, but how you treat people. Love you, Dad." Thousands of similar stories were pouring in from across the country. Hotel workers, janitors, maintenance staff, housekeepers, people whose work often went unnoticed were suddenly being celebrated. All because a famous actor had chosen to walk in their shoes for a brief moment. By the end of his shift, Joe's phone was buzzing constantly with messages from his daughter, who had seen the story online and couldn't believe her father had met her childhood crush. He promised to call her with all the details when he got home. As he was clocking out, Alex the bellhop came running up to him, practically bouncing with excitement. "Joe, have you seen the news? We're famous," he exclaimed, holding up his phone to show a national news website. The headline read, "Keanu Reeves goes undercover as hotel janitor, teaches lesson in human dignity." Below was a photo of Keanu in the maintenance uniform, standing next to Joe in the lobby. Joe couldn't remember anyone taking that picture, but there it was for the world to see. "They want to interview us," Alex continued breathlessly. CNN, "Good morning, America, everyone. The hotel's phone has been ringing off the hook all day." Joe frowned. "I don't know about all that. I'm not much for cameras." "But don't you see what's happening?" Alex insisted. "This isn't just about Keanu anymore. It's about all the people who work jobs like ours and get treated like they're nothing. This is a chance to change that, even a little bit." As Joe considered Alex's words, his phone buzzed with a new text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. When he opened it, his heart skipped a beat. "Hey Joe, it's Keanu. Got your number from the hotel. Just checking in to see how the day went. The internet is going crazy, but I wanted to make sure you're doing okay with all the attention. Let me know if it's too much. I know a thing or two about unwanted spotlight." Joe stared at his phone in disbelief. With everything going on in his life, Keanu Reeves had taken the time to check on a hotel maintenance man he'd met just once. Perhaps Alex was right. Maybe this story was about something bigger than a chance encounter with a movie star. Maybe it was about remembering that behind every uniform, whether an actor's costume or a maintenance worker's jacket, was a person worthy of dignity and respect. As Joe walked out of the hotel that evening, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the entrance. At first, he thought they might be fans hoping for a Keanu sighting, but as he got closer, he realized they were holding signs. Signs that read, "Thank you, hotel workers," and "Everyone deserves respect," and "Be excellent to each other." Among them was the little girl who had spoken to Keanu in the lobby, now holding her father's hand and a homemade sign decorated with stars and hearts. When she spotted Joe, she tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed. "Look, Daddy. It's the janitor man from the story." Joe stopped in his tracks, unsure of what to do next. The crowd turned toward him, and for a moment everything was silent. Joe stood frozen as the small crowd turned their attention to him. His first instinct was to duck his head and hurry past, to retreat to the familiar comfort of anonymity. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the little girl's bright smile, or the genuine warmth in the eyes of the people looking at him. "Are you really the maintenance man from the Keanu story?" someone called out. Joe nodded, his cheeks warming. "I'm just a regular guy who loaned his jacket to the wrong person," he said with a self-conscious laugh. A woman stepped forward holding her phone. "My sister has been a housekeeper at a hotel for 15 years. She called me crying this morning after seeing the story online. Said it was the first time she felt like people might actually see her. My dad was a janitor his whole life," added a man near the back of the group. "He used to come home with stories about how people would walk right past him like he wasn't even there." "I wish he was still around to see this." The little girl broke away from her father and ran up to Joe, thrusting a crayon drawing toward him. "I made this for you," she said proudly. Joe carefully took the picture. It showed two stick figures, one tall with a cap labeled Joe, and one with long black hair labeled Keanu, standing side by side with big smiles. Above them, in wobbly letters, were the words, "Heroes don't. Always wear capes." "Thank you," Joe said, his voice catching. "This might be the nicest gift I've ever gotten." The girl beamed up at him. "My daddy says people forget to be nice sometimes, they just need reminding." Out of the corner of his eye, Joe noticed a news van pulling up to the curb. A reporter and cameraman were already making their way toward the growing crowd. "Looks like you're about to be on TV," Alex the bellhop said, appearing at Joe's side. Ready for your 15 minutes of fame? Joe folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Not really, he admitted. I'm not sure what to say. Just tell the truth, Alex advised. That's all anyone wants to hear. The reporter, a polished woman with a bright smile, approached with her microphone extended. Excuse me, are you Joseph? Miller, the maintenance worker from the viral Keanu Reeves story? Joe nodded, suddenly aware of his worn work clothes and the fact that he hadn't planned on being on television when he'd left home that morning. Would you mind answering a few questions? People across the country are talking about what happened here yesterday. Before Joe could respond, the hotel's front doors opened and the manager stepped out, now looking as polished and confident as ever. Mr. Miller would be happy to speak with you, he said smoothly. But perhaps we could move this inside? We've prepared a small reception area for the press. Joe shot the manager a surprised look, but the manager just gave him a small nod of encouragement. 20 minutes later, Joe found himself seated in the hotel's elegant conference room. The space had been quickly arranged with comfortable chairs, refreshments, and even a backdrop with the hotel's logo. Several reporters and cameras were set up in front of him, while Alex and a few other staff members sat supportively to the side. So, Mr. Miller, began the reporter who had approached him outside, tell us about your encounter with Keanu Reeves. Joe took a deep breath. Well, he borrowed my jacket, he began simply. I didn't know it at the time, of course. I just came in for my evening shift and found out a movie star had been walking around in my uniform. And then you had dinner with him? Another reporter prompted. I brought him some staff dinner, yeah. Nothing fancy. We just talked. What did you talk about? Asked a third reporter, leaning forward eagerly. Joe thought back to his conversation with Keanu in the hotel room. Life, mostly. Work, family. He asked about my daughter. I told him about my 32 years working in hotels. Did he share any Hollywood secrets? Someone called out. Joe shook his head. We didn't talk much about his work. He seemed more interested in mine, actually. Asked what it was like to work at a place like this, whether people treated us well. And do they? The first reporter asked. Treat you well? The room fell quiet, waiting for his answer. Joe glanced at the hotel manager, who met his gaze steadily. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, Joe answered honestly. Most guests don't really see us. We're just the people who fix their leaky faucets or change their light bulbs. But that's starting to change, I think. Today was different. How so? The reporter pressed. People looked me in the eye today, Joe said simply. They said thank you. One man told me about his father who was a janitor. It's like suddenly they remembered we're people too. His words hung in the air for a moment. Then the questions started coming from all directions. What do you think about the "Don't be excellent to each other" movement that's trending? Has Keanu Reeves contacted you since the incident? What will you do with the premiere tickets he gave you? Joe answered as best he could, his natural straightforwardness winning over the reporters. He showed them the text message from Keanu, shared his surprise at being invited to management meetings, and laughed about his daughter's excitement over the premiere tickets. Last question, said the original reporter. What would you say to people watching this who work in service jobs like yours? Joe thought for a moment. I'd say, keep your head up. What you do matters, even when it feels like nobody notices. And to everyone else, I'd say remember that we're all just people trying to get through the day. A little kindness goes a long way. As the press conference wrapped up, Joe's phone buzzed with another text message. It was Keanu again. Just saw you on live TV. You're a natural. Meant what I said about the premiere. Bring your daughter, and the jacket still fits great. Joe smiled, shaking his head in disbelief at how much his life had changed in just 24 hours. 3 weeks later, Joe stood nervously on the red carpet of Keanu's film premiere, wearing a new suit and accompanied by his beaming daughter. Flashbulbs popped around them as photographers recognized the maintenance man from the viral story. To his surprise, several other hotel staff members were there too. Alex the bellhop, the housekeeper who had helped Keanu in the elevator, even the little girl and her father who had made the drawing. Keanu had apparently invited them all as they made their way inside. Joe spotted a familiar figure waiting for them. Keanu himself, casually dressed in a simple black suit, standing away from the main crowd. "Joe," Keanu called out, walking over with a warm smile. "You made it." He hugged Joe like an old friend, then greeted Joe's daughter, who was trying hard not to faint from excitement. "I brought something for you," Joe said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his maintenance uniform cap, clean and pressed. "Thought you might need this for your next undercover mission?" Keanu laughed and accepted the cap, immediately putting it on despite his formal attire. "How's it look?" he asked. "Like you're ready to fix some leaky faucets," Joe replied with a grin. As they headed into the theater together, Keanu kept the cap on, drawing curious looks from other celebrities and industry executives. When asked about it by reporters, he simply said, "It belongs to a hero of mine." Later that evening, after the film ended to enthusiastic applause, Keanu invited Joe and the other hotel staff to join him at the exclusive after-party. As they entered the glittering venue filled with Hollywood elite, a strange thing happened. The room fell quiet, and then, one by one, people began to applaud. They weren't clapping for Keanu. They were clapping for Joe and the others, the maintenance workers, housekeepers, and bellhops who represented countless others like them. The hotel manager, who had also been invited, leaned over to Joe and whispered, "2 months ago, these people wouldn't have looked twice at us. Now they're giving us a standing ovation, all because you loaned your jacket to the right person." Joe shook his head. "No," he replied quietly. "All because the right person remembered that everyone deserves respect." 6 months later, Joe still worked at the Grand Plaza Hotel, though, with a new title, Director of Staff Relations. The hotel had become famous for its progressive employee policies, including better pay, more flexible hours, and regular recognition programs. Joe's once ignored suggestions had become the foundation for changes that were now being adopted by hotels across the country. The maintenance jacket that Keanu had borrowed hung framed in the hotel lobby, alongside a simple plaque that read, "Be excellent to each other." Beside it hung the crayon drawing from the little girl, now preserved behind glass. Tourists often stopped to take pictures with the jacket, and many of the hotel's wealthier clients made a point of speaking to the maintenance staff by name, a small change that meant more than any tip ever could. As for Keanu, he still texted Joe occasionally. They had dinner whenever he was in town, usually in the staff cafeteria, rather than the hotel's fancy restaurant. Sometimes they talked about the foundation Keanu had started to support service workers. Sometimes they just talked about life. The story of the movie star and the maintenance man had faded from the headlines, replaced by newer viral sensations and celebrity scandals. But its impact lingered in the small everyday interactions between people who might once have ignored each other. And in hotels across the country, a curious thing began to happen. Guests started to learn the names of the people who cleaned their rooms and fixed their problems. They looked them in the eye. They said thank you. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to see beyond the uniform, to remember that underneath every job title, behind every name tag, is a human being worthy of dignity and respect, even if that person has to dress as a janitor to remind us.